Hey there.
Hey.
Well, here we are, our very first Sidekick podcast episode.
Really exciting, isn't it?
No, it has been exciting thinking about this and working on it for a bit of time. Excited to share it with the universe.
Yeah.
Maybe to formally introduce ourselves a bit to our listeners in case they aren't familiar with us. I'm Nora.
I'm Bonny. We're two of the co-founders of Sidekick, and we're just really excited to be here today and kind of bring you into some of the conversations that Nora and I basically have on a daily basis.
And hopefully you enjoy them. Similar to the work we do at Sidekick, which is a realization consultancy where we work with business leaders to realize their business dreams, take big ideas into action and create some momentum. That's exactly what we hope to do in these conversations every time with you.
Yeah, so we're really we love taking these big concepts, big ideas, trends that are out there in the world, talk about them, explore them, look at it from different perspectives, but then always ask ourselves at the end, like, so what? What does this mean for ourselves in our business, for business leaders, and how can we help everyone just kind of take that first next step?
Yeah. So maybe think of us as the spark in your day. Introduce you to some new perspectives, hopefully thought-provoking, but leave you with some tangible takeaways that you can easily start putting it into action the next day, and all in about 30 minutes, and hopefully some fun along the way.
Yeah, definitely some fun. We love to say we take our work seriously, but not ourselves. So let's try to keep it light and fun. Would also like to say, like, we don't want this to be a broadcast, right?
No.
So, we're all for collaboration, conversational. So we're trying to make it an open conversation, and we'll always invite everyone to kind of join the conversations after the podcast or during podcast, so that we kind of continue to explore.
Yeah. So if you are a business leader, a change maker, an entrepreneur, and believe that business is about more than just growth for growth's sake, but about impact and making a positive impact in the world, this is the place for you.
Yeah.
So should we jump into our first episode?
Let's do it.
All right. So today's topic is one that we feel is a bit timely and are worried that it may date itself quickly because things are changing so quickly on the topic and evolving every day. But we are going to explore the question, how do you turn uncertainty into momentum?
Ooh. Big to small.
Yes.
Love it. Let's dive in.
Great.
So we're talking about uncertainty today.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like it's out there everywhere all the time.
Yep.
Right? Like, I hear people talk about how we're in the age of uncertainty, how everything is so much more volatile than ever. How can businesses survive? It's kind of everything seems to be evolving around this kind of sentiment of uncertainty. And I mean, at the start, and that's months ago, I felt like it's just driving me crazy. It's because it's something that is not natural to me, right? Like, I hardly ever feel like really uncertain. I love risk. I love the messiness. I thrive in it, right? Mm-hmm. So whenever uncertainty comes up, it's not my thing. But I cannot ignore it anymore. And then especially kind of with recent events like geopolitical climate, the whole world is in change. And I get it. Mm-hmm. I get how people really feel kind of uncertain in these times. And there's a lot going on, right?
Yeah.
But I would just love to understand it a bit better.
Yeah. And I think, you mentioned we started talking about this a few months ago and it felt like really real. And I think to a lot of people, it still feels really real. And you look at just the past 5 years alone, from global pandemic to kind of mention some of the political shifts to global economy, trade shifts that are happening to wars that are continuing to break out and still continue on to this day. So there are a lot of factors contributing to the uncertainty. So I don't want to dismiss the feeling. And I totally get, knowing you, why you're like, yeah, uncertainty, let's go for it. And some people might be like, take shelter. So I don't want us to dismiss that because I do think it's a real feeling, and do want to recognize, while we are business owners, strategists, consultants, today I want to encourage us to explore it through a business lens, knowing it has a bunch of intersections across a variety of ways in people's lives. But I do think it begs the question of, why right now does it feel more or worse? And why is it on headlines? Every newsletter I follow is talking about it. You're hearing about it in the media. You're hearing it in pop culture references. Why does it feel worse?
Yep. And we're also seeing those like curves from economists, right? Where it's literally like the curve's only going up when it comes to like perception of uncertainty. So again, we cannot deny it, but I think we can explore, like you said, it from a business perspective, where I feel like oftentimes uncertainty is perceived as a negative thing. It's numbing. It's almost an excuse for people to just hold off on anything, wait for things to settle, and not move forward. And I think there must be another way to go about it. So is there a way that we can kind of turn around that mindset, that narrative? How can we look at uncertainty as something that sparks ideas, innovation, creative thinking? Like, is there an opportunity behind this uncertainty, especially from a business perspective?
For sure. And it makes me think of, I was reading an article and a quote from a former F1 racer said, you can never pass 15 cars on a track in a warm, sunny day, but you can when it's raining.
You know who's really good at that?
Oh. You tell me. Your Dutch is going to reveal itself. I mean, it's a worthwhile mention.
I guess we're just used to the rain.
Yeah, you are used to the rain. Maybe you're used to uncertainty. I don't know. But it does get me think. So I do think there is a like reframing of it that is a worthwhile thing to explore. But before we get into that, you know, like in thinking about this episode and even just the conversations we've been having and with other people, I'm like, what, again, going to this question, why does it feel worse?
Yeah.
You know, and we were at a dinner party and everyone's kind of comparing which generation had it worse and who's got it worse. And we were like, wait, guys, this is not a competition anyone wants to win. But it did make me think of a couple of factors. Like one, there is the pace of change that might be a lot faster than previous generations or centuries has experienced.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things that contribute to that. I think the connectedness of the world, you know, something that is happening on the other side of the ocean in a country when we weren't connected by social media or technology all the time.
Makes its way over to us.
Yeah,
quicker.
would we feel it? So there's a bit of like the uncertainty in all the places of the world are now feel like a global uncertainty instead of an isolated uncertainty. Yeah. But being the nerd that I am, I was like, when was this word coined? Who invented it? And it's been around for about 50 years. So there's a guy, John Kenneth Galbraith, that coined it in his TV show and his book back in the 70s. So it has
been
the
age of uncertainty.
The age of uncertainty. So it's definitely something that's out there. And I think you look at the statistics out there, to name a few, when I was reading into this, you know, of this pace of change, 70% of employees feel really uncomfortable. And it's almost anxiety driving the pace of change that is happening, that ability that it's out of their control and they don't know which way is up every day. And there's a bit of, you know, CEOs when interviewed, there's lots of studies around. They're like, this is just the beginning of the uncertainty. There's only going to be more of it. It will be faster. It will be bigger. So to your point, what do we do about it? And how do you merge those two things together? So it makes me think about the question maybe isn't, is this the most uncertain time? But what can leaders actually do about it as leaders?
As leaders, yeah. And I think that's a fair point. And I mean, that social conversation that we were both part of was a trigger point for me, as I alluded to in the beginning. Like it brings out this rebel in me. I want to understand it. And I kind of maybe at first kind of go take the complete opposite perspective and say like, no, it's not more uncertain than ever. So, but I'm open to be convinced otherwise, right? So, and I also did some digging and some research, and what it made me realize is there's a true kind of discrepancy or potential discrepancy between like what's factually and like the rational perspective to uncertainty versus like the perceived uncertainty, the feelings, the emotions that come with it, and there's no way to argue with that, right? Like feelings, emotions, they're true. They're as true as they are for anyone, any individual.
As valid as facts.
Exactly. So consider that a fact. But then when you look at the data, and you also already mentioned it, like over generations, there's always been a level of change. And I think what I thought was really interesting is that, yes, we are currently a generation or in an era that has a really, really rapid speed of change. There are people who argue that the generation before us, so like our parents, the baby boomers, would have seen the most transformational change. Like with the rise of the internet, everything going digital. And then even before that, like industrial revolutions, like that's kind of the generation before that, but more transformational change. And then potentially, and who knows, like we don't have a crystal ball, but like the Gen Alpha and Beta and what comes after that, they're born into a whole new era that might see accelerated exponential growth or innovation. So a level of change is always there. It just makes me wonder, is there a component of like us just getting older? And as we get older, you just kind of get a little out of touch of what's happening and what's new. Like my son, who's 2 years old, already knows how to navigate an iPhone. So it's kind of, is there a component of us just getting older and not being the front runners anymore? And a little bit of like, to what extent do we truly embrace that? And didn't our parents feel the same way when we were just born? Like we came up with new things. We came home from school with things that they had never heard of. Yeah. Right. So I do feel there is a component of that. Like in your life, you just kind of get more and more out of touch. Generally speaking, not everyone, with the newest. Which might feed into that perceived level of uncertainty.
Well, and you speak about generations, which I think is an interesting lens to look at how different generations responded to what type of change they had. But then you also mentioned the Industrial Revolution. So if you look at these revolutions, agricultural revolution, industrial revolution, technological revolution, there was now the AI one, there's global. Yeah. And when I was looking at some of them, it's like the duration of time that revolution spanned was, in some cases, hundreds of years. When you first look at the first agricultural revolution, where now you look at the last 20 years, we've had all these revolutions happening at the same time. Yeah. You've got global, you've got AI, you've got entrepreneurship. It's all, again, happening at the same time. So I think this pace of change and connectivity of change does ring true. But you bring up an interesting point, referencing your son or to just becoming out of touch, this rigidity piece, right? Or I flip it on its head of adaptability. And when I started thinking about, okay, so if this is the environment and lots of external factors for businesses and business leaders to be managing right now, like I said, in the last 5 years, there's been a lot of external factors coming at leaders. What are some of the traits that define a successful organization who have been able to move through uncertainty, work with uncertainty, maybe even leverage it as their competitive advantage? And I think what you were just mentioning of this rigidity or, like getting stuck in your ways, that is true to companies. So I think there's this big, and it might be oversimplifying it, of rigidity to adaptability. And those leaders don't wait for clarity. They find it, they move to action. They are like leading in momentum and in motion, and you just keep going one foot in front of the other. So I think there's something there when you look at a business, and if you're listening to this, take stock of your organization and say, like, are we rigid? Do we take shelter during uncertainty, or do we move forward? Do we grasp it? Do we just move to action the best we possibly can and adapt for the next step?
Yeah. And I think that's already a nice reframing of the narrative, right? Like, so instead of having a discussion around are we in the most uncertain time or not? Like, I think there's no end to it. Yeah. So that's the new reality. That's our environment. Just take uncertainty as a given. And how can you then, as an organization, best show up? And what are some of those traits or like characteristics of organizations that seem to kind of do better? And you mentioned adaptability. I think that's a great kind of characteristic for organizations to have, especially in uncertain times. And I'm just thinking of examples, right? Like, and you have the classic ones of Apple and BlackBerry and Netflix versus Blockbuster. And I think that's also where you really see that in uncertain times, how one organization responds in uncertainty is just very different than the other. And I think in both of those examples, one really embraced the change and took risk and jumped in, whereas others were probably, or like the Blockbuster and the BlackBerry example, waited and basically were too late to move, right? But then also like those are pretty like old examples, but in more recent days with everything that's happening in the world, I think you also see the organizations stand out that were just prepared for uncertainty. Like Amazon, I think they built skill, they built supply chain diversification. So in the COVID times and now with the tariffs, they were able to like move fast, respond fast, because they were set up in a way, in an agile way, that they could do it and mitigate those risks. And I think, I mentioned the tariffs. What I'm kind of seeing in the headlines or like in the business magazines around organizations that mitigate that risk, that are kind of less concerned about the impacts, are the ones that are set up to quickly, rapidly adapt, to your point, to changing environments in their supply chain, in their manufacturing locations, product locations, internally too. Like, are there new roles required to deal with new factors that come up? I think with adaptability is
their cultures too. When you say internally, like with people, again, reading, I'm probably going to butcher this, but there was something around highly engaged workforces that identify they feel they are in a psychologically safe environment are more likely to follow the leader or take initiative themselves and move through that change. So it's just not resting on the leader's shoulders. But, you say Amazon, and I was thinking about the example. I was like, remember when they were just an online bookstore?
Right. So isn't that crazy?
Yeah. Like it's a good example over time. But, there is something again of like, these organizations, and you keep kind of bringing up a good point around like moving to action. They were prepared, which maybe we can get into that in a second of like, what does that actually mean? How are you prepared? How do you move into action? But there was a stat that I read that 78% of high-performing organizations are most likely to expand in certain times. So they looked at uncertain times, organizations that did well, didn't do well, and almost all of the organizations that did well had some sort of expansion.
During uncertain time.
The uncertain time.
Right.
Market expansion, product expansion, geographics, whatever it may be. So it is a good example of they evolved, they adapted, they did something new, and they benefited from it. Yeah. They drove and passed 15 cars in the pouring rain.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. They acted when others were just kind of sitting and waiting for things to settle. You mentioned leadership too. Like, I think there's a really important role for leaders in organizations when it comes to uncertain times, right? And it brings to mind this framework that I love working with, Stephen Covey, the circle of influence, right? So
yes.
The most external, like the outside circle, is the circle of concern, and that's kind of where the things that we started off with, like this age of uncertainty, how do businesses survive? All of those concerns, those questions, they're almost fear driven, right? So like, if you choose to stay in that circle of concern, you'll probably are not the first to act. You're kind of fearing, you're waiting, you're just sitting there, and you probably will miss the wave, right? Then if you move inwards, there's the circle of influence. So that's kind of leaders that focus on their circle of influence, the things that they can help shape, how can they kind of work within their partner network with others, what can they influence, almost like in a political way that gets them closer to action. But then I think the leaders that are really, really thriving in these circumstances are the ones that focus on that most inner circle, is the circle of control. So what are the decisions, the actions that you can take today that have a real impact tomorrow?
this race car driving analogy is just running through. It's almost like you can't control that it's pouring rain today, but you can control what you're strategically going to do on the racetrack.
What tires do you choose?
Yeah. Choose what's in your control. I like that. And so it's a bit of this, again, reframing it a little bit of not to fear it, not to resist it, not to hide and shelter, but how do you embrace uncertainty? How do you plan for it? It will always be there. It is a known factor. So how do you move to embracing uncertainty in your leadership style and creating a culture that embraces that?
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, I mean, I feel like talked up here a little bit, and maybe this is where we can segue into the more tangible. And this is my practicality coming out of me. I was like, so what? This is all great. And
Nora's favorite question.
I don't want to add more buzzwords out into the word. Yes, my favorite question. So what? What if somebody's listening to this? Like, what do they do with it? Right? If they show up to work, tomorrow, what can they start to do differently? What are some tangible things? What do you think?
One well-known leadership principle that I think
you love your principles.
I love
today.
my principles. Yeah. So it's not not buzzwords, but principles today. I love a good framework. I'm a strategist. It's the way that I'm wired that I think. So, but I do think this one is really tangible for leaders out there who are looking to make decisions at the right time. It's the 70% rule. So pretty simple. Really. Like, it's make your decisions once you have 70% of the information. Don't wait until you have 100%. If you wait until you have 100%, collect all the data, look at it from all the various different perspectives, your competitors will have moved, or at least one of your competitors will have moved. So you will always be too late. Whereas with 70%, you have reduced, mitigated the risk just enough to be comfortable, confident to move ahead.
Interesting. And I'd never heard of this one before. And it's different than the 80-20 rule. Just for the mathematicians out there to not confuse anybody.
Both numbers and percentages. But yes, so the 80-20% rule is the principle around how 20% of your actions are driving 80% of your results. So it's more, you would use it more to allocate your resources towards those 20% high impact projects, initiatives that lead to 80% of the results. So, I mean, if you bring the two together, I would say the 70% rule comes first, kind of in making your decisions, setting a direction, and then choosing within that, how do you allocate your resources? What do you focus on? Focus on the 20% that will give you the biggest impact down the line.
Very cool. I like that 70% rule, and it just makes me chuckle because I'm like, oh man, people must be so nervous working with me because I'll make a decision. I'm very decisive off of 30% of the information, which maybe isn't good. So I need to push myself to what are the few other pieces that I need to know to fully be able to make a decision. But I can also see there's folks out there that need 120% of that information to feel comfortable. So it probably takes both, and we'll meet somewhere in the middle. But I do like that. So if you're faced with a decision to be made tomorrow where you don't know all of the information, you can't predict something, you know it will likely change in a week from now, what is in your control? What do you know based off of 70% of the information out there, and make a decision?
Yeah.
Oh, well, that seems pretty tangible.
What's your best advice?
Oh, well, you know me. I've got 3 things I'd like to share. But I think I can't, having led teams through uncertainty, big change, whether uncertainty created internally or disruption created internally or external factors, and led teams that are very large, like 60, 70 people. The first thing that we can't lose sight of is for leaders to stay really focused on their why. Don't lose sight of that purpose of your organization, of your department, of your team. Stay really focused on that why and over communicate it. So people don't think it's a baby out with the bathwater situation. Over communicate. And I think it's Jim Collins and Good to Great or Great by Choice. It's like communicate to the factor of 10. Say it 10 times. Like, you're going to feel like a broken record, but continue to bring that to the forefront. So that's number 1. Number 2 is around this reframing risk. So I think risk is inherent with uncertainty, especially if we look at only knowing 70% of the information. There is a risk not knowing 30%. Focusing just on what's in your control, there is a risk that what's in your control will be overshadowed by the other things outside of your control. But how do you reframe it and knowing it is something that will always exist? It is something to be managed and not solved for. So if you as a leader kind of have your playground or your sandbox of all the tools and things you need to pull upon, always know risk is going to be there. So don't ignore it. Don't go, shove it to the corner. Like actually consider it and make an informed decision based off of it. And then within that, some of the best leaders that I've observed, they manage that downside. They acknowledge the downside or the risk is there and they manage it, but they aggressively pursue the upside. And they look at both hand in hand,
Right.
which I think that is this piece, right? Of it's easy to take shelter and control our costs and let's just steady and let the storm pass, this too shall pass. Or how do you identify those opportunities and aggressively pursue them? 3, last one, and then I'll stop talking. But it's like, how do you know what opportunities to pursue? So I think hand in hand with this is creating and celebrating a culture of experimentation. So for me, this is where, I felt like you get in this zone, this rhythm with uncertainty, and you're like ebbing and flowing with it, right? And it's a beautiful thing when it gets there. So how do you test some of these ideas, pressure test them, experiment with them before you make these big, bold choices and put a lot of money and resources behind it, and have those feedback loops and encourage others to do this. Again, it doesn't have to be on the leadership team, but if you have someone on the team, it's like, bring me your best recommendations. How did you test them? What did you find? Celebrate the learnings in that too. So I would say stay focused on the why, over communicate, reframe the risk, and manage the risk and aggressively pursue those upsides. And then 3, create a culture of experimentation.
Yeah. Smaller strategic bets over like large transformational projects, although they might have a time and place too. But like in this kind of managing uncertainty, adapting risk, it's kind of experiment, create that playground almost, right?
Yeah.
Love that. I think in all of it, and you triggered me earlier when you said like you're the one that makes decisions with 30% of the information. I'm not unlike that, but it is an interesting component within leadership, right? Like leaders come in all different shapes, forms, personalities, and they all bring in their own qualities, right? So, I mean, as you know, I'm DISC certified. And the DISC personality framework, I think, really creates a language kind of awareness around a lot of things in how you lead, your preferences, your behaviors, your differences between kind of people that you work with and yourself. So I think it's a great tool to kind of create that awareness of how, in this context, different leaders with different styles might respond to levels of uncertainty and risk.
Our own DNA plays a part in that.
Yeah. Your DNA, your lived experiences, that all kind of results in your behavior and your choices today. So if you look at DISC, and starting with myself, I would be in the category of the dominant style. Very decisive, action-oriented, love a challenge. And when it comes to uncertainty, like you just said, I would probably move too quick. With 30% of the information, I probably think I know it all, I got it covered, let's move. Then there is the influence style, the I style, is more of the like optimistic, people-centric leader, like often referred to as like the cheerleader. As
an I style, we're more than just a cheerleader. Thank you very much.
Very optimistic leaders, seeing opportunities, first to see the opportunity. And also in times of uncertainties, I style leaders will see the opportunity. There's a downside to that, or a potential risk of not seeing the risks that come with it, or moving kind of past them too quickly.
Yeah.
Then moving kind of in the framework to the bottom right is the support style, the S style. They like steady stability processes, supporting collaboration with people. I would say they would have a hard time with moving quickly, moving fast. So they can be a really good team member or partner to a D or an I style, to make sure that you do look at those different perspectives and bring them in and take them into consideration. And then there's the C style, more analytical, fact-based. They love their information, love the data. I would say that's the group that if you would let them play the uncertainty thing, then they would wait for that 120% of the information, right? So their risk is to not move. But I think the key message in this is that none of them are the ideal leader in times of uncertainty, right? Like I think they all come with their great value and perspectives. But for leaders, I think it's really good to create that awareness of like, what style and preference do you have? Who are the members in your team? And how are you going to build the best possible team for times of uncertainty?
Yeah. And as someone who's the I style, cheerleader, sure, but we really value like enthusiasm, collaboration. Let's go, let's set those big goals, but we have to achieve it together. But we do move fast. So I can see how folks that are process oriented, want to dot their I's, cross their T's, that's how you say it, want all the information, or S styles that they really want to make sure everyone's involved, everyone's contributing, they are best supporting it. When sometimes you got to move quickly, and that can't, I can see why people would be like frustrated or, stressed out working with me. So I'll take a mental note there.
Imagine how people feel like working with the both of us.
Oh goodness gracious. Wow. But it is, you said like, it takes kind of, to paraphrase, it takes all four styles to really thrive in uncertainty probably. But as one leader, it makes me think about this adaptability. We talked about adaptability as an organization, adaptability as a leader as well, whether it's situational leadership or I've seen this term ambidextrous leaders. Wow. Say that 5 times really fast. But you can be all things and know when you need to call on all things. And if that isn't you, the people around you who that is their superpower, and you need to call them into it. And I've said it a few times here of leaders can't go alone in this, right? Like I do, and maybe this is my eye showing. You got to go together, right? And you got to bring the strengths of everyone along. So,
so it's not about like changing your style, or it's adapting it to the circumstances, and also knowing and being aware of your blind spots, right? And that's where you can rely on the people around you.
Yeah.
I think ultimately what we've been talking about, like if you are a leader in times of uncertainty, which, surprise, that's all of us.
Yeah, we're here.
And you are looking to create momentum, to stay ahead. I think my conclusion is like momentum doesn't come from certainty, right? It comes from clarity, consistency, decision-making, courage to take decisions, even in times, or maybe especially in times that are really, really messy.
I like that. It is very courageous. Like you have to be courageous and be ready to fail fast or surprise yourself and get the trust of others to move along. But, I think at the beginning where you were saying 3 months ago, you were frustrated. Is this a buzzword? I do think, and I've really like your perspective here that we've been exploring of, it's not something to be feared or resisted, but really embrace uncertainty. And it makes me think of a past rowing coach, and he would talk about it with pain. Pain is part of the experience of a rowing race, right? So when it shows up at your door, you open the door. He was British. Let it in. Ask if it would like milk with their tea. Like you got to embrace it. So I think maybe that if there's one kind of headline to take away is, instead of being like, oh, this is uncertain times, what do you do? Be like, yeah, this is uncertain times. And this is where some of the greatest things are going to happen. So how do we embrace it and how do we work with it?
Yeah. So don't deny it. But I do think, to your point, great leaders are the ones that are not waiting for that clarity or that certainty to come.
Yeah.
They take control, focus on that circle of control, and they create clarity, consistency, set that direction, and ultimately drive action and impact.
I think action and impact is a really good one to add. Okay. Well, maybe this is a good point to put a challenge out to our listeners. Spoiler. Or surprise, I guess. You've got a bit of homework, but we'd love to end each episode with a bit of a challenge for our listeners. So what can you do tomorrow? And hopefully you've learned a lot of tips along the way, but one specific challenge for you is the next time you're faced with uncertainty or a big decision where you definitely don't know all of the information, instead of getting distracted or maybe paralyzed by all the things you don't know or trying to predict the future, ask yourself, what is one thing in my control that I can make a decision on today and then act on it? So one thing that is in my control today that I can make a decision on and act on it, and see where that leads you. Because I think that's how momentum is built.
Love it. Yeah, and I think with that we've come to the end of our episode today.
I know, so exciting.
So I do hope that this sparked some thinking for our listeners. If you find yourself in uncertain times, please join the conversation. Share with us how you deal with it. Whether you have any like tangible technical advice for other leaders out there. Join the conversation. Follow us. Hit us up on LinkedIn. We'd love to continue the conversation. And we're excited to see you again in our next episode.
Yeah. And hopefully this was valuable and just not another one of our daily chats, but with microphones this time. But it was exciting. We'll see you next time.